Georgians have a chance to make some history today if Reverend Raphael Warnock is elected to the Senate. Warnock would become the state's first black senator. He'd also be the first black Democrat to be elected to the Senate in the South. If both he and Jon Ossoff win, it'd be the first time in 18 years two Democrats represented the Peach State in the upper chamber. That, combined with President-elect Biden's victory, is giving Southern Democrats hope that there's lasting change in Georgia. Representative Jim Clyburn joins me now from Washington. He's the House Majority Whip and serves South Carolina's 6th Congressional District, which includes parts of Columbia and Charleston. Congressman Clyburn, welcome back to Red and Blue. Thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So, Congressman, you have been in office since 1993, and I wonder, at this point in 2021, what is your sense of the political landscape in Georgia for Democrats right now?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that question. I think that there is some transitioning taking place in Georgia. I think it has a lot to do with the migration that's taking place in the country. As you know, though I've been in office or in Congress almost 30 years, I've been on earth a little longer than that. And I am from South Carolina. I'm a student of the mass migration that took place in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s when black people left the South because there were not opportunities for them to make a living. My mother was the only one of her sisters, and she had 6 of them, to stay in the South. Everybody else left. And so what you see now is the fact that they're changing in demographics, that a lot of people who would have left the South are now staying in the South. A lot of jobs that only went to the North are now located in the South. There in South Carolina, we make more tires now than they make in the state of Ohio. And when I was coming along, all the tire companies were in the state of Ohio. So this is what's changing. And so when these kinds of things happen, educated people of color remaining in the state and people of color from outside the state moving into the state, the demographics change. And so that's what's taking place in Georgia. It is taking place to a lesser extent in South Carolina, but we're catching up. So you're going to see this kind of transition taking place all over the South, and then that is going to change voting patterns because these backgrounds, these experiences are going to show up at the polls.
So with that as our backdrop here, I want to ask you about Democratic leadership. So Democrats come to the new Congress with a slim majority. As someone in leadership, what are those bigger conversations you are having about the future direction of the Democratic Party?
Well, that plays into the same issue. For instance, right now, I'm the only Democrat from South Carolina. Bennett Thompson, the only Democrat from Mississippi. You've got Cedric Richmond, the only Democrat from Louisiana. Terry Sewell, the only Democrat from Alabama. And that's what is happening. The only Democrat, and all of us have one thing in common: we're all black. So that means that over time, as redistricting has been done, a lot of people accuse us of representing gerrymandered districts. What they refuse to take into account is that the gerrymandering that was done was to pile of people of color into one district and then bleach out the districts all around it so you can have the rest of them represented by Republicans. So that's what is taking place here. And this is not new. The same thing happened in the 1890s there in South Carolina, when all the black people in the state were lumped into one congressional district. And this kind of shenanigans that took place in the past, we got rid of all of that with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But the Supreme Court of the United States in this case of Shelby v. Holder, gutted the Voting Rights Act. And that's why Georgia went to those new laws that Stacey Abrams was defeated by. And this has returned. And so that's what's going on here. And I don't know why people keep ignoring these facts. It's just like everybody said that, the South was represented by Democrats. No, Strom Thurmond was a Democrat until the Voting Rights Act came and he left the party. And the same thing happened in these other southern states as well, in their reaction to civil rights legislation that was championed by Lyndon Baines Johnson, a Southern Democrat, is what caused a lot of what you see happening throughout the South today. But that's not new either, because when Harry Truman signed the executive order to integrate the armed services, Strom Thurmond left the Democratic Party and formed the States' Rights Party. That was in 1948. So these things are happening, and that's what this president is doing. He's down there trying to get a Southern elected official to overturn the will of the voters. And he's focusing on black voting precincts.
So I wanted to ask you, Congressman, I'm sorry to interrupt about that, because this phone call between President Trump and the Georgia Secretary of State has certainly gotten a lot of attention. You have expressed hope that Georgia officials should pursue criminal charges, but also called impeachment proceedings a waste of time. How do you reconcile those two ideas?
Because we only have 14 or 15 days left in this presidency. And so I would like for someone to tell me how we could draw up impeachment proceedings and get all that done in 14 or 15 days. I don't see how that can be done. And so why waste our time dealing with something that just cannot be done? It's okay for the Republicans to waste their time trying to overturn the results of this election, but I would advise us to leave this activity because it looks as if they were violating state laws as well as federal laws. And so that's where the investigation ought to take place. And I think there are people down in Georgia that are looking into this as we speak.
Do you want to see the Biden Justice Department pursue charges against President Trump after he leaves office?
It all depends on what the charges are. If you're talking about the misuse of his office as it relates to this election, the election will be over. The Electoral College will have done its work, and that will be behind us. But if there are other issues that come to the attention of the Justice Department, I think the Justice Department ought to do its job. That doesn't mean that the president has to be involved in that. He would not be involved in that. But it does mean that any officer of the court, to include the Attorney General, will do what is necessary to pursue justice on behalf of the American people. So what the Justice Department will do as an independent agency, it should do. That's not Biden. Biden will have a big enough job trying to get us beyond this pandemic and trying to get this economy back on equity footing. And I call it that because that's what needs to happen when we bring the economy back. We've seen it before. When we have all these economic programs that work well for some communities and not so well for others, Joe Biden's going to have a big enough job trying to do what's fair by all people throughout the country.
Representative Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me.